Hello, hello. Is mine working?
Check, check. I work.
You work? Hello, hello. Am I working? Yep. Okay.
Check.
So the people in the back, are you afraid of us? I mean, there's nobody in the front.
Yeah, that's two of our VPs sitting in the back row. They don't, we call them out there.
Come on, it'll be fun up front. I can throw things to you.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Betsy Schneider, and I am Chief of Staff here at St. Charles Community College, and I'm excited to be able to host this panel on disaster response in our community. The topic for this year came from this being the 20-year anniversary of when Hurricane Katrina happened in the New Orleans, Louisiana area. At that time, I was working in one of my first fundraising jobs and marketing jobs out of college in Cincinnati, Ohio at the American Red Cross. I spent the first 5 to 6 years of my career at the Red Cross in Cincinnati and in Orange County, California. So when this topic came up, I was excited to be able to be a part of it and be able to discuss the experience. I know a lot has changed in 20 years since I worked for the Red Cross. Like, y'all aren't carrying pagers around to respond to fire. Do you got a pager on you? Okay, I had to carry a pager to respond to fires or anything like that in the community at that time. So I know it's a little different now, but I'd like to introduce our three panelists that we have with us today. Janie Albright is Director of St. Charles County Regional Emergency Management, which is a division of the St. Charles County Police Department. Prior to transferring into emergency management, she also served as evidence manager and a police dispatcher with the county PD. She and her family are longtime O'Fallon residents. Over here to my far right, your left, we have Scott, but we just practiced it, Scott Barthelmess, who serves as fire chief of the Eureka Fire Protection District. He has been involved in public safety for 33 years with experience in the fire service, EMS, law enforcement, hazmat, and search and rescue. He has responded to incidents across the country. Jeremy Hallra has spent nearly a quarter century in emergency medical services, providing care directly and indirectly to individuals in need. Next year, he will celebrate 25 years of service with St. Charles County Ambulance District, where he has worked as a paramedic, battalion chief, and since 2018, a Deputy Chief of Special Operations and Logistics. In his current role, Jeremy is tasked with oversight of supply chain logistics, fleet management, and emergency preparedness. In addition, he leads the district's urban search and rescue team and tactical EMS units, and serves as the organization's liaison with St. Charles County Department of Emergency Communication. During his tenure in the role, Jeremy has taken steps to modernize these areas of operations, except he's still carrying the pager, so I don't know how modern. There you go. Gaining efficiencies across the system. In 2021, Jeremy was recognized as one of the American Ambulance Association's 40 Under 40, a grouping of young EMS professionals celebrated for their leadership and dedication to service. So I want to thank the three of you for being here with us today. Our Red Cross representatives unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but we have a great team of experts that have been very involved in the community for a number of years, as you can see. And so today we're going to talk about preparedness, response, community resilience, and what these experiences are like and how you can be prepared as well. So I am going to open it up. First, I'm going to open it up to you all. Would you like to add anything to my entry statement?
No.
Okay.
My PIO wrote that, so it's like long and wordy.
I scoot my chair farther away.
So you obviously can tell that they all have worked together many times over the years, too, in these situations. So let's look at the big picture in preparedness. What do you all see as the biggest risks to our community in what we face in terms of disasters?
That's your world, ma'am. That's your world. I got to remember this mic.
Well, for St. Charles County, 40% of the county is a floodplain. So flooding and flash flooding and severe storms, mainly damaging winds, whether it's straight line winds or a tornado, doesn't really matter. But damaging winds from severe storms and hail, I think, are probably the most common natural hazards we have here.
You know, and aside from the common stuff that she's speaking of, you know, everybody's probably heard of the New Madrid fault line with earthquakes. You know, it's been 25 years-ish that the region really started making a big push towards being prepared for that. Fortunately, it doesn't happen all the time, but I think last week there was a 2.4 magnitude, down towards Fenton area, and that's close. That's close to St. Charles County. You know, and all of us up here, we're not only responsible for our home areas, but we're very big in the regional and state aspect as well. So looking at what we can do as a community to support everyone else, you know, if that in Fenton area would have been worse, everybody from St. Charles County would be down there. So I think earthquakes are kind of one of the big ones that we look at, that very low possibility, but something that could definitely happen.
I want to just add to that. In 2008, I was living right over here off of Birdie Hills Road, and I was woken up in the middle of the night. It was the night I brought my firstborn child home from the hospital, and we had an earthquake that woke me up because my legs were bouncing on the bed. And I think that was like a 4.3 I wrote in her baby book.
Yeah, the quake of '08. I remember that. That was fun.
That's interesting. I don't think about earthquakes here very much. I mentioned that I spent some time at Red Cross in Orange County in Southern California, and I looked at that tracker every day to see where an earthquake had happened, and never felt one myself in the time that we lived there. So it just doesn't cross my mind. I always think tornadoes here, so that's interesting. Phone down. It's fine. Scott, you wanted that?
So I think that the thing that we talk about these responses, right, and that there's regional, but I think we've gotten a lot better in preparedness in that the organizations across the area spend a lot of time with you know, our external stakeholders, with the media and the like, and communicating those messages, because, you know, preparedness is key. You know, 21-year-old Scott loved burning buildings and things like that. 54-year-old Scott doesn't like those because he doesn't heal as well, right? And doesn't, but you know, those types of things, right? Where we want to take and have that preparedness aspect. And you think about, you know, campuses, right? Mm-hmm. How many students you have on campus that if you had a disaster here and those processes of sheltering in place and stuff like that, or you know, at high schools, the same thing. We have, you know, the high school right by my office has 1,900 students, right? Not uncommon to have that large of a population in a high school. And, you know, we just need to work on those so that, you know, I look at my mom as my best customer, right? She's 75 years old, in great shape. And you think, how can I make her safe, right? And how can I make other people safe? How can my wife's not a first responder. Nobody wanted to marry me until I was 42. I'm 54 and have a 9-year-old. Sorry, but you know, how can I make him safe, right? And those things. So I think that's really a big part of that conversation, that bigger picture, because I think we get drawn into response, right? And we first responders, emergency management stuff has been reactive for so long, and I think we really in the past, you know, 20, 25 years across the region have got much more proactive, making people safe. We're never going to run out of calls. We're never going to run out of disasters. We're never going to run. So what can we do to make the communities better as we do that?
This is a good time to plug the fact that if you're on campus next Wednesday, the 25th, 3rd, 4th, 24th at 10 a.m., we will be having a fire drill for all of our campuses. I don't do dates without seeing a calendar. You've witnessed that yourselves from my emails that I sent you. How do you balance planning for the most likely versus worst case scenarios?
That's one of the more difficult things. You know, we sit here and dream in our roles of bad days, what that looks like, and try to be as prepared as you can for that. And at some level, you have to stop. Like, you know, you've seen hoarders and, you know, watch videos of all these preppers, and, you know, you can have so much stuff ready, but what happens when you don't use it for 20 years? You know, so you have to find that fine line of what's enough that we can be prepared with, be it equipment, people, you know, whatever that is, but also looking at that regional, state, and federal level of what can I do right now? What am I going to be able to handle when that bad day happens? Have a little bit more than that, and then I'm relying on my partners from St. Louis County, Warren County, and beyond to bring in that additional resource. So, like I said, we spend, it's sad that my job is thinking of worst day scenarios, but we have to be prepared to be for that worst day scenario.
Go ahead. I'm a guest in your county, so, I didn't know it existed across this side of the river.
So what we do a lot of emergency planning and drafting plans for the county, how the county's going to respond. It's an all hazards plan, so it's meant to be scalable, sort of modular, when we can pick and choose the pieces that we need for whatever type of disaster we're facing. So I think with the most common things that I called out earlier, we have experienced that many times through the years. So planning for the most common stuff is sort of second nature, and we've responded to those threats multiple times. So the focus on the more extreme types of events, that I think if you're prepared for the worst case, then you can handle, anything less. And we've handled less numerous times. So the planning, aside from bringing new people in and just natural turnover in the profession, aside from that, the more common things we handle already. So there's a little bit less of planning for that. We need to address the things that we think will really challenge us. And that's part of what we do as a region when we do our annual THIRA, which is our threat and hazard risk analysis, where we try to think about the things that would challenge our resources as a region the most. What's going to strain us the most? What's going to serve to be the biggest challenge? And then we kind of focus planning efforts around that.
And I think that the regionalization has been key. It has grown so much. If something bad is happening, I mean, how many times you and I end up on the phone or texts and emails and stuff back and forth, that, you look at St. Louis City, it started, basically the tornado that touched down basically right there in Brentwood, Clayton area, and worked its way through North City. You look at that, when the assets were deployed, I ended up being a task force leader down there. We had, St. Charles County, Lincoln County, Warren County, in that there, and we have the ability to draw those assets in, right? To draw other responders in, and it's become so norm. And we even now, we almost practice in that, hey, there's an event, a large-scale event going on, so we start moving stuff around, and we get used to that. And with the, advancement of computer-aided dispatching and being able, I think for us, we've got to rely a lot more on the emergency management people, that they're so good at getting us stuff, and they have their list of stuff, be it a backhoe or traffic control or any of those things, that it's gotten a lot smoother over the years. And I think we're getting into, I think that some of the challenge we have, like when you talk about that natural turnover, is that succession, right? That bringing up that next generation. So I think that's opportunities like for students here and things like that, it is a work that has a reward and has a purpose and stuff. So it's that constant change. But the regionalization's great, and then, preparing, we got to have the future leaders there, right? So that, in 6 years when I'm in a farm in northern Missouri, that somebody else can do this, so.
And one big thing we have on our side too is history. We take every disaster and we tear it apart and look at what happened. You mentioned the 20th anniversary of Katrina. We learned so much from that. There were so many things that went right in that, but the media coverage on it, pointing out all the faults that happened, and that's huge today. Like even with, as he mentioned, the St. Louis tornado of recent, there was a lot of negative that happened there, but on the flip side, there was so much positive. Like within, I think it was 45 minutes of that tornado touching down in St. Louis, we had St. Charles County resources there, St. Louis County resources there, starting that, excuse me, search and rescue aspect and that initial phase. And then from a regional aspect, I know St. Charles County had people assisting in their emergency management agency down there for months, you know, post-event. So we use a lot of history and we learn from it, and that's how we get better. We find what we did wrong last time and how we make that better for next time.
So you kind of just touched on this a little bit with that first, the first 45 minutes. Tell me a little bit about when something happens, what does that first 24 to 48 hours look like for you all?
Chaos. Organized chaos, we'll go with that.
Organized.
The initial incident happened, and a lot of things like the tornado and storms and things like that we can see coming. We have a little bit more like the pre-planning and things like that where we start standing up resources. We have the urban search and rescue teams that will put on alert so they're ready to go when we know we've got a great chance of a tornado somewhere around. So we're ready. It's those zero notice events that really, really take you off. And even the tornado, yeah, the conditions were right, but it really wasn't. We didn't expect that level of devastation, to occur that quickly. So it's very reactionary, but we go back to that plan. We've got all these plans in place. We've done it before. We know what to expect. We know what to do. So we get in, and from a fire and EMS perspective, our first is life safety. We're surveying, we're triaging, we're getting people out of the danger area, and then that starts that's the first step of the recovery process is starting with the rescue aspect.
Yeah, and I would agree, like, that first, and I don't even think it's 24 hours of chaos anymore. We get in there, we quickly get a grasp of it. We start to figure out, we do what are called operational periods. So we sit there and go, okay, hey, what are we going to need? How long is this projected out, right? So it may be a rescue period for this point where we're trying to, find people that are still alive and we're putting out fires and all those things. And then you get into recovery period, which is usually much longer. That's months, if not years. And a lot of time we go out of that, and that becomes an emergency management function, right? And the volunteer organizations and all that stuff, where controlled chaos is a good, a good way of stating that, because it gets crazy, and you're trying to gather all this information, and you're doing this size up, and you're doing all you're bringing all this stuff in. And you got to make decisions. And then after you do those decisions, you start to go back and go, okay, what can I start changing that'll refocus assets and things like that. So it's crazy. I mean, but I also think some of us thrive on that craziness. It makes caffeine look like nothing. And that you're used to operating in that norm. And that's your norm. And you're like, and it's. You almost want that to happen, not in a bad way. You just like, that's where we thrive, and that's and you want to use your skills and all that stuff. If somebody needs help, well, let's be there,
So emergency management is a little different than the agencies they work for, because we're not first responders. But first of all, I want to back up a little bit to storms, tornadoes, things that we can see coming. And most of the emergency managers in the region and even the state are in direct contact with the National Weather Service. Excuse me.
Okay.
So I'll cover that. So what we can do is they have while you recover from that. See, we're helping each other out. Control chaos. But you can sit there and they'll start alerting us, and you'll start getting information in. The same can be said. Also I think you see things, planned events, that even now that's gotten a lot better, because we can sit there and call the National Weather Service and saying, hey, we're having this event. So this weekend big in the St. Louis area is the balloon races, right? They can call and say, this is coming on. Can you give us spot weather forecasts and stuff like that? So we can be ready for that. But I mean, that coordination is there. Got it? Back to you. All right.
So when we get notified from the Weather Service that we've got the potential for severe weather, we're monitoring that always. Our department is lucky enough to have several full-time employees. So we have a duty officer who is the on-call person. Every week it rotates to a different person. So their responsibility, if we're getting severe weather sometime after our regular business hours, it's their job to watch the weather, maintain that contact with the National Weather Service through a chat that we have with them, and alert the rest of us if, we start seeing storms. Their job is to get into the EOC before the storms cross the county boundaries. And so for us personally, and this is how we're a little bit different than St. Louis City and St. Louis County, but we have at least 2 people in the EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, to monitor the storms as they move through the county. And we manually have to hit the button, if you will, to activate the outdoor warning sirens. We do have several redundancies if we have storms that bubble up instead of, come in a line that we can watch all day long coming across the state. But if we have something that were to bubble up or originate in St. Charles County, we have the ability to call our dispatch center and have them activate the sirens. We also have the ability to activate our sirens from our phones or from our mobile radios. So we have several redundancies built in, but we are typically in the Emergency Operations Center for things we know are coming. If it's a no-notice event, we get notified from our dispatch center or maybe one of our partner agencies, and then we will go in and stand up the EOC. So the first 24 hours for us looks like standing up the EOC, activating different components of our EOC depending on what the event looks like, what kind of damage we're observing across the county, and we can bring in different partners like our county highway department or MoDOT or EMS or fire departments that are in the affected jurisdiction. So those first 24 to 48 hours for us looks like basically standing up the EOC, making any public alerts or warnings that we need to do, whether it's with the sirens or sending those WIA alerts, the wireless emergency alerts to cell phones, asking people to avoid an area, anything like that. And then working with the responders on scene as they dictate what the priorities are going to be over the next, 24 hours, we start to piece together a plan.
So a couple things real quick. So I don't know if everybody knows what an EOC or Emergency Operations Center truly functions as. I don't want to take your thunder. But it's truly a resource for every partner agency in the county. Like we bring in private, public entities to work together, and it's really a collaborative effort of everyone involved. Like she said, we can have Ameren in there, we can have fire departments, highway department. Depending on the scenario, that's what functions you bring in. So her and I are sitting across the room from each other, and we can talk. We can make decisions in an instant, as opposed to, 15 years ago that wasn't as prominent of a situation. So decisions were delayed. I may be on the scene of something and I'm needing a resource. Well, now I can talk to my liaison at the Emergency Operations Center, and there's no delay. It's a rapid fire situation. So we really, when COVID started, don't want to bring up any bad memories, that was probably the busiest the Emergency Operations Center has ever been in St. Charles County. And it was impressive to see all the different people involved working through all the different processes and needs. And, public health was sitting right next to me, and we'd have a discussion on something, and we'd make a decision right now. And it wouldn't be, well, I'll get back to you in a couple hours. So very impressive aspect to that. And another point, she mentioned the full-time staff that the emergency management has. That hasn't always been a thing. Emergency management used to always be kind of a reactive approach, and now they're very proactive, and agencies and counties and governments are really seeing the value of having people at the ready to respond and be at that resource.
Great. So, Oh, I've mentioned Red Cross, that's my history. Can y'all talk a little bit about what kind of role volunteers play in disaster response and volunteer organizations and those sort of things?
So I think they're vital. I mean, you look at everything from the basic CERT team, the community emergency response team that are taught to everyday citizens, to the Red Cross, to Team Rubicon, and all these other entities that can come in. Southern Baptists who are experts at chainsawing and all these different things that they come in and they support those functions, right? Because once for us the disaster hits, but everything else still keeps going on, right? The other EMS calls, the other fires, all those things don't stop, and that's where their expertise, for the emergency management, they have those relationships, and there's a regional BOAD committee group and all that meet, that they're there to support that, right? And I'll let you comment on, but I mean, they're vital. They're vital.
Yes, so one of the organizations, if you will, that we can bring into the EOC is called the COAD, and that stands for Community Organizations Active in Disasters. And really, it's just a conglomerate of all types of nonprofits, faith-based organizations, volunteer organizations that want to, contribute volunteers, money, whatever, in the recovery process of a disaster. And so those are the folks that we'll turn to when we had COVID and they were trying to run a call center. We call on them when we have flooding and we need to put together what we call muck out kits for people to be able to go in and sanitize and clean out their homes after the flooding. Just any number of things. The one thing I will say is one of the most important things during a disaster, if we're talking about bringing in volunteers, is bringing in an organization that can manage the volunteers, because the first responders can't do that. We can't do that. That's why we work with the COAD. We rely on them to have a volunteer organization that will manage those volunteers. So that on the site of a disaster, like when we had our Defiance tornado, we brought in AmeriCorps. They set up a volunteer reception center when we started getting word that people were just showing up at homeowners' properties down in Defiance. And they came in and they can register and track volunteer hours and assign people that have certain skills. So if you can operate a chainsaw, that's important for us to know. They will mark that down and then send you to whoever's home, they need debris cut up. If you can just help homeowners sort through the debris to have our debris contractors come through and pick up the debris, that's, an option also. But one very important thing about the volunteers is tracking volunteer hours. That is a good way for the county to be reimbursed from FEMA on the money that we spend in the response phase. So those volunteer hours get reimbursed at a certain dollar amount from FEMA. And so that's a big thing to help the county. I know you're probably like, we don't really care about how much money the county spends, but it's your taxpayer dollars, right? So it is important that the county make back any amount of money that they can, that they spend on this response, because that, goes back into building better culverts and things like that, so.
One last piece with that, it always amazes me in every disaster, large-scale incident that I've been to, the amount of volunteer organizations that are truly out there. And it's impressive. In every bad situation that I've seen, there's always good. There's always that shining light on the backside. And a lot of that is those volunteer organizations. They play a huge role. You had mentioned the Southern Baptist. When I was down at Hurricane Harvey several years ago, they fed us. They did our laundry. They took care of all those basic needs while we were out doing the job. you know, searching areas. And I mean, we were driving hundreds and hundreds of miles searching cities that were underwater. We'd come back and we had 150 people staying in this barn, and all our laundry was stacked up on our beds, and they were cooking hot meals, and you know, that's amazing. And that's just one small component of that, you know, she mentioned the debris removal. That's huge. You know, you picture your house and every tree and your roofs laying in your yard. Are you gonna be able to handle that by yourself? No, these volunteers come and help you with that, and at no cost.
You know, you mentioned going to Hurricane Harvey, and that's another thing, like all these communities, when Katrina happened, deployed volunteers down and agencies down to Louisiana to help with that. But then even agencies back in all of our cities were accepting people from that community back in. I know that we had a shelter set up for weeks in Cincinnati that we had people that had been displaced from Katrina staying at, that the Red Cross was running there.
Yeah,
And I don't think, oh, sorry.
I still run into people today that came to St. Louis area during Katrina because they were evacuated out of their area, and they made this their new home.
Yeah.
So kind of it's, you know, and that happens all over the country.
And I don't think a lot of people don't realize, you know, you might see on TV the Missouri Task Force 1, which is the FEMA team, and all these deployments that occur, that there's your first responders that are actually getting sent to those areas because of the specialties and stuff. You know, Ian, Laura, all those different ones that I've been to, you know, that we take our staffs and deploy them down there to help. That's just, the system's gotten a lot better, and you know, technology, communication, all other stuff, that if there's a need, we can send those out, then it doesn't drain those areas and stuff like that. So I think it's that when we talked about beforehand, that the big picture, the picture's a lot bigger, and the area that we're covering is a lot bigger.
So let's talk a little bit about improvements we've seen over the years. So how does technology help improve these responses?
I think
Besides still carrying the pager.
it's like a radio pager. It's kind of
Okay, I'll
it's
let
kind of
it go.
techy. I'm kind of cool.
I'll let it go.
I mean, technology is our best friend. You know, we've learned so much over the years, and
When it works.
when it works. I was getting to that. So we've got a newer technology called SARCOP. It's a GPS-built system that helps us one component of it is as we're searching areas, it tracks everything that the responders are doing. And we can actually go up to your house and mark that we talked to you, you're fine, or we found, you know, a deceased body, or we, you know, whatever it was, and we can do a quick damage assessment. And the amazing thing about that is it shoots it straight back to the emergency ops center, the command post, whoever's watching it, and we start to build that picture. Well, now it's up on a big screen that everybody can kind of see that map. And the early parts of it, we can actually plot where the disaster hit. So like the tornado, we had a pretty good idea how wide it was and exactly what area that hit through. So as we're responding into like Clayton and St. Louis City, we knew exactly what areas we had to search. It wasn't just guys on the ground going, yep, that building's down, that one's down, those are my edges. It was a map that showed us exactly where to go. Flip side of that is when you don't have any service, it doesn't feed back. So it was one thing that we really learned with the recent tornado. But the nice thing about it does save it all. So as soon as we get back to some kind of signal, it dumps all that into the system. So they're sitting there going, oh crap, and the whole thing just lights up with disaster. But that really paints the picture of what we're at for people that aren't actually boots on the ground in the situation, that they can actually start seeing what we're looking at.
I think the use of drones is also vital. You know, that the ability to launch a drone and go, okay, here's this view of what's going on, or launching the drone ahead of you. We've gotten to the point where we use it every day. You know, we get a call for, you know, somebody in distress on the river. I want to launch that drone because then it'll direct where the boats go and stuff like that. But in the bigger picture of disaster, you can go, hey, let me look at the rooftops. Let me look at where things are, where wires are down, and you start to get that bird's eye view. And again, you take that and add it to SARCOP, and you take that and add those things in and use that it just, that technology provides us with a lot better information to make decisions. So
We use a lot of technology in the Emergency Operations Center. In fact, if you have ever seen our room, we have a large screen, projector screen, and I don't know, 17 other screens in the room. So we do a lot of monitoring, streaming in local news, national news, anything they might send us, like Jeremy mentioned, the SARCOP feeds, where we can kind of monitor the damage. We also monitor our dispatch, their CAD system. So as we're, talking to weather service and hearing about the storms, we can also see when people start calling 911 about roofs being blown off houses or telephone poles down, things like that. We're monitoring utility outages. We also use technology for mass notification. I don't know if you guys have something similar on your campus. So when we need some of our partner agencies to come in, instead of going down a call tree, which takes time, we can send an alert to all the people that we need to respond to the EOC at one time. So that's really helpful. I can't think.
On the drone aspect, that technology is advancing so rapidly. We use it daily too out here in the county for a multitude of different things. But one of the nice features is we can stream all that video back. And quick story, I was on vacation in California, and we had some kids stuck on a cliff, and we were doing an active rope rescue. I was sitting at dinner watching the rescue happen live while it was occurring, just on my phone. It was the most amazing thing in the world that 20 years ago we didn't have that capability. And that also adds into those different layers of different information that we're feeding back to the emergency ops center and the command post. They can see what we're looking at. I don't have to tell the story, and they know, yep, there it is, I see it now.
And I think that helps them get the reason. They can start thinking ahead, because we have the relationships are so much better now that they can start thinking about, hey, what resources can we start getting for them? That you have somebody that, it's not per se tunnel vision that you can sometimes get, but you get very focused on what's going on, and there you got somebody else that's sitting back going, hey, have you thought about this? Or hey, we got this lined up if you need that, or whatever. It's just the teamwork, I think, is because of technology, because of communication, because of those things, has gotten so much better over the years that it makes things smoother.
So good reminder for everyone on campus that if you haven't signed up for the text alert system for our own disasters, go to the website and search that out and sign up, so you'll get alerts for anything that happens on campus too. So what do you think are the biggest challenges you face during a disaster?
That's a good question.
People.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sincere, because bottom line, to get stuff done, you need people. In reality, you need people. And if you get these large-scale disasters, you wear your people out. And it, the past, 6 days, if we would have got a disaster in the past 6 days, it's hot, right? And if we're doing our thing and we're doing rescues, it wears people out. So you got to think about that, And when technology's not working, guess what? You got to use people's minds and all those things. And I think that's both on the scene, and that's both in terms of our organizations. Always, getting more people in. Public safety is not as attractive as it used to be, right? Because we work these 48-hour shifts, and we do all the, and you miss holidays and all other stuff, and you attracting people, because we need those young people that start learning from the old people, right? And doing that. But we also, when you look at it and go, hey, my son, he likes going on calls with me. He thinks it's cool, right? He does my computer in my car. I'm like, this is great. All right, type this for me, buddy. All right, Dad, you need that. But the technology is better accepted by the younger people. So because they're used to VR and all the other stuff, that they can use that, and then they can. You got to balance all that. And from us,
Are you calling us old?
I mean, just saying. But yeah, I mean, retirement's knocking on the no, 6 years. But when you sit there and think about that, I think in the old day, back when we started, that young people just come here, do what we say. Now it's like, hey, how can we use it? So there's so many aspects of that, people getting stuff done, using the resources. I'm not scared. You know, if I got a 22-year-old, you know, firefighter that is huge on drones, have at it. You know, and give me your input and do that and use that technology to our advantage. And but at the same time, we also gotta we gotta balance that. And a lot of times that regional response is beneficial because, you know, we start if we have something going on in St. Louis County, we start wearing our people out. Hey, St. Charles, hey, Franklin, hey, Jeffco, send your people so we can backfill. So
I would say from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges that we face, because we get calls from the community, are sort of a misunderstanding of the disaster process and the recovery piece. You know, I mean, everybody knows something happens, you call 911, people respond, but what was it, the flash flood in July of 2022, you know, we had ambulances that were out of service for a really long time because they had rescued people out of their homes in the middle of the night, and they were wet and it was chilly and they had no place to go. So they didn't want to leave them, but then, you know, it was taking our ambulances out of service. So that's where, you know, we come in and say, hey, we need to call Red Cross or one of the school districts and see if they can open up their gymnasium so these people have a place to go to, like, collect themselves, collect their thoughts, figure out what their next steps are. And so I think that is an issue. Also, I think we're very much in a time where we like to have all of the answers instantly, right? And so understanding that these things take time, even when it comes, you know, to larger disasters like the recent St. Louis City tornado or our July 22 flash flooding, the disaster declaration process, not having the citizens that you don't know the process, right? Unless you've been through it, and you don't figure it out until you're going through it, and sometimes that's a little too late. So just the piece of seeking out all of the information that you can. And side plug, we do offer an emergency preparedness citizens academy where we discuss things like that specifically to try to educate our county residents about what this process looks like. What should you know before you are in the middle of that process and being, you know, aggravated and upset by learning things that you didn't know you needed to know until you're in the thick of it. So
Kind of to feed off of that a little bit too. So remember that we're not immune to disaster. You know, we're impacted just as much as the citizens of the community are. You know, look back at like the Joplin tornadoes that wiped out a hospital. It wiped out firehouses. It wiped out ambulances, police cars. They were part of the disaster. So that just delays everything. We are, you know, I can drive a fire truck, an ambulance, my car through pretty much anything, and if we got to get to you, we're going to find a way to get to you. But one of the biggest issues that we had, like in Clayton with the tornado, is if you've ever been to Clayton, there's trees that are ginormous that have been there for hundreds of years. How do you get around a 5-6 foot wide tree that's laying across the road? You can't. So we're hampered by that as well. I think I forget what the exact statistic is, but in a large disaster, you automatically lose a third of your response power right out of the gate for whatever that community impacts. So, you know, we look back and I talk COVID again. It's, you know, I still have nightmares about COVID, but how many people, paramedics alone, that we had out with COVID, you know, that depletes our workforce. A tornado, there's a chance that it could hit one of our paramedics' houses or several of them, or one of our stations, firehouse. So we're directly impacted as well, but it's how resilient we are to get around that. And you know, luckily we have those partnerships to assist.
And I think perception's a part of that too. Like, people think, hey, you're going to call 911 and we're going to respond, right? And if you're getting slammed with stuff, if you have, March 14th, when the winds and all the other stuff came through, and you know, we had 34 calls for my 3 firehouses in 2 hours. 8 of those were brush fires, 2 of those were house fires, all this other stuff that, and you're like, well, I called 911, then why aren't they here? You know, and there are those impacts, and then there's that perception that people see on TV that, hey, this was solved right away, or it doesn't happen that way. You know, you can watch an hour-long TV where they had the disaster and everything was fine, it just, people get stuck in that perception, and that's where we have to bring in. I think we've gotten a lot better in that we bring in our public information officer, our media people, and start talking about those things and trying to educate the public as quickly as possible so that, hey, here's what's going on, and they have honest information to make their decisions off of.
I want to give, if anyone has any questions, I want to give y'all a chance to ask them any questions.
Now's your chance.
I pay people in the crowd to ask Jeremy. No. I know you do it for free.
If not, I have a couple more before we wrap up, but I just wanted to give the opportunity. Nope.
Come on, think of something. It's interactive.
What do you got, Sarah?
Really curious about, okay, so St. Louis area, we're surrounded by waterways, we're surrounded by bridges. What do we do if there is some type of mass evacuation event?
So funny that you mentioned that. So was that last year? Yep. Last year. So the Army and National Guard do a yearly drill somewhere in the country. Janie and I were fortunate enough to go down and monitor one 2 years ago down in Nashville, and we were bringing it because it was coming to St. Louis the next year, and that was mainly focused on just that. St. Louis County is an island. Most people don't realize that. You cannot get into St. Louis County without going over a bridge from whatever, from St. Louis side, St. Charles side, everywhere. What happens in an earthquake? Bridges are gone. We have nothing. There's resources out there. We can build a bridge. The Army has their bridging unit, which is pretty impressive, but it takes time. It takes time to get there. We're fortunate enough we have boats that we can get people back and forth, but we're not talking personnel carriers that we can get thousands of people across. But the benefit is St. Louis County is a huge area with a lot of great infrastructure, so we can still support that. But on the flip side, if we have something bad out here and they can't get to us, we're fairly well taken care of in St. Charles County as well, but the more rural you get, the less resources are available. So that's a very huge concern for us. But we have ways, and we adapt and overcome. But back to that exercise we did last year, we practiced taking fire trucks, ambulances across the Mississippi River on this makeshift bridge, which was kind of sketchy at first, but it was pretty impressive.
I watched. I didn't do it.
And they literally fly them in with helicopters and drop these big things in the water, and they flop out, and they put them together. Kind of cool. I actually got in a water gun fight with one of the National Guard boats. I lost.
And we got to train. We got to train for that because, like, you think if you're in Florida, if you're in Texas, and you've been down there, and you see they have those evacuation routes, right, for hurricanes and things like that. It just, that's a part of it. Like, when we sit here and think about what's that worst case scenario, okay, how do we solve that? And my wife gives me so much trouble because I play make-believe, all right? I do. I play make-believe. I'm very fortunate. I've been able to teach across the country. I taught in 27 states across the country. I see other stuff, and I go, what would I do if that happened? So then I come back and I challenge my staff and go, what are we going to do if this happens?
I saw one. I'm going to come back.
Take Jeremy's mic with you.
I can talk loud.
Yeah.
I only have 4 mics.
Yes, my question is, with recent budget challenges that FEMA has faced, is that impacting you yet? What do you expect in the future?
Yes. Today, not so much. I don't know that we've had any direct impacts, and Janie can probably speak to this better. We plan for things like that. There's always discussion of taxes and how to make, how to save money for the citizens. Nobody likes paying taxes, and there's all this discussion of getting rid of property taxes and real estate taxes, which, believe you me, if I didn't have to pay my taxes every December, I'd be happy. But what's the flip side to that? We have to get creative in ways, nothing gets cheaper. Think about buying a vehicle 10 years ago versus buying that same vehicle today. It's 50, 60, 70% more. That's the same for everything we do. We used to pay 5 cents for oxygen tubing, now I'm paying $1. That adds up. So we have to get creative and find different ways to manage that and pool our resources to be able to manage it better. So we talked earlier about the regional aspect and all the planning that we do. So 20 years ago, St. Charles County may have had everything we need to handle a disaster. Not saying we did, but why? When St. Louis County's got the same stuff, how about they manage some of the stuff, we manage some of the stuff, they manage some of the stuff, so it's less expensive for the region and the people, but we still have the same resources available. So getting really creative in the ways is huge.
With us, like, I hear a lot of times, oh, your firefighters are sleeping, right? They do sleep, they're 48 hours, right? But you're paying for that readiness. So you take that readiness to a regional effort now. We haven't had the direct impacts from FEMA, but it'll be seen if there is a major declaration. You did see, a pretty big bump in responses to different things, from the FEMA USAR teams and all that stuff that they're still going out the door. It's a constant challenge for us that, we talk about those price increases. A fire truck, the exact same fire truck that I bought 3 years ago for $750,000 is $1.2 million now. So we're all doing that, but we just have to, I think that's what forces us to be more regionalized. I think that's what's forced us over the years to go, hey, how we can do this. Because the EOCs, they rock at having contracts and stuff in place. I mean, 25 years ago, I would never thought about, hey, I'm going to call the EOC and have them do something. But it's just we're getting better, and like Jeremy talked about, the fact that we learn from our mistakes. No matter what we do, we're going to make a mistake because we're making a lot of decisions with limited information in a short amount of time. We learn from that. We do after actions. But I think that's, and you sit here and think like, I'm technically 40 miles away, but I mean we've probably worked on 3 or 4 incident responses together this year alone. So
yeah, and one thing with that, I know earlier in the year there was the big cuts to FEMA, and there was a lot of concern over that, but I think a lot of that was redirected more to the state and local. So through the same funding sources, but that money's going more to a local aspect because it's been proven that agencies can handle the majority of the bigger stuff. And the delays of getting, nothing against FEMA, they do an amazing job when they're here, but they're not here.
Every disaster starts locally and it ends locally, meaning that the disaster comes through, we start handling it, then we get these other resources, they leave, and it comes back to us.
I have one other question regarding supplies and resources. We're looking at a potential government shutdown at the end of the month. How much of your resources currently come from federal funding, and what impact will this have on your readiness response?
Fortunately, none. So I say none from impact. We do receive a lot of federal funding for disaster preparedness and disaster response, but that stuff's already in place. So it's not maintained by the federal government. So some examples of that are some like mass casualty incident trailers and response equipment. EMA's got a ton of stuff. All of our urban search and rescue equipment, different things like that we build over the years that are federally funded through different grant programs. Those are already funded and in place, and then we just maintain them as a region.
The only thing that'll probably affect for me is training, because I send firefighters, the National Fire Academy and other FEMA programs. There's a medical training facility down in Alabama and stuff. They'll shut down, but we'll just adjust and do the training otherwise.
I just want to say one thing about FEMA. Nobody asked, but I want everyone to know. So when we talk about disasters being federally declared and FEMA coming in, a couple things. One, there's 2 different forms of assistance. What normally gets declared in a federal disaster is what we call public assistance. And that's funding that goes back to the jurisdiction for different types there's different categories of work, some being emergency protective actions and things like that. It goes back to the jurisdiction. It doesn't go to the individuals that might have been affected by the disaster. There is another form of FEMA assistance that's called individual assistance, and that is the assistance that goes back to homeowners. What you really need to know about FEMA and individual assistance is that the average payout for FEMA assistance is about $3,000 to $5,000. I think in my class I just taught last Thursday, our state coordinator was there. The max payout from FEMA in the St. Louis City tornado to someone whose home was completely demolished and everything they own, the max payout was $42,000. So it is so important for everyone to keep up with your homeowner's insurance. Make sure you have the proper type and amount of insurance, and when your agent reaches out at the end of the year like, hey, let's review that. I used to try to dodge those calls, but those are very important because that really got some folks during the Defiance tornado, which was right when the inflation was going crazy. The cost of building supplies just like skyrocketed. And there were people that were, actively building down there and didn't have the proper amount of insurance just because the prices were inflating so quickly. But that's my stick about FEMA.
Any other questions? All right. I'm going to do one last wrap-up question then to end our day today. So can each of you tell me what's one thing you wish the public better understood about disaster response?
We kind of touched on it earlier. When disaster hits, it hits everybody. And we're coming. I promise you. It may seem like forever before that help arrives, and that's even on a isolated single emergency at your house. If your loved one's having a heart attack, it's going to seem like forever. It's the worst day of your life. A tornado hits your house and you're stuck in your basement. That's tenfold. We have the resources, we have the training, we have the knowledge. We're coming, but it's not going to be right now. And that self-resilience and that community resilience aspect is huge. Have a plan, know what you're doing. Years ago, the fire service pushed really hard these evacuation drills, like we just discussed. There's going to be a fire drill. We do that all the time. Have a drill in your house. Know what to do. If you've got kids, they have to know where to go. Plan for that disaster, though. We're really good at knowing what to do, stop, drop, and roll, and evacuate for a fire. What do you do in a tornado when it hits your house? What do you do when an earthquake happens? What do you do when flash flooding hits? Have some kind of plan. And there's tons of resources out there for free to help you with that and to get you prepared. Like there's a push. I've still got the radio. It's a little hand crank radio I got like 20 years ago from FEMA that I don't even know if it works anymore. But it was like a prep package that I did some survey and I got for free. It had the radio so I could listen to the NOAA weather, and I don't even know what else was in it. But, know things like that. Have a plan, be prepared.
Track. No.
It might. So that's the biggest thing. Have your own plan, be resilient, but we are coming. And we are delayed, but we're coming.
To add on that, so when he talks about these drills up, so you look back to fires in schools. Okay, and you look back historically, 40, 50 years ago, how many kids were killed in fires in schools? When's the last time you've seen a kid killed in a fire in a school now, right? So when
You don't.
What?
I said you don't.
You don't. You're right, you don't. And I think that's the important part. We're coming. Like, we are coming. But I think the older I got, and I think we have seen so many people's worst days over and over and over, that the importance of preparedness, I think that's what I wish people would focus on more. That just being ready and being able to, I don't think common sense is as common as it used to be, and I don't think people,
You know what's funny? You guys will sit there and like, these guys are crazy. We work together so much that that's how we interact. My wife like grounds me all the time. But you know, the thing is that being able to be problem solvers and doing that and thinking those things through of what would you do? You know, I was working the New Year's Eve tornado. That was what, 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. I just started dating my wife. She's at my house, and I call her and I say, hey, there's a tornado coming. And I live in Kirkwood, and there's a tornado coming, and it was going right that way. And it actually hit Sunset Hills and Crestwood. And she goes, I'm good. I'm in the basement. I got my battery on my cell phone's charged. I got my Cheez-Its, and I got my Jack and Coke. And I'm like, that's how I knew I got to marry her. But, you know, in reality, it's that preparedness thought, right? Is that making sure that you can think ahead. And you're not gonna solve every problem, but if you can keep your family safe, you know, or your coworkers and stuff safe, we're coming. But be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem, right? And that's what we handle. But I mean, I'm telling you, would you not rather? I'd much rather go, hey, we're there, they're safe. You know, they got a little damage versus they didn't have a plan, they're trapped, they're whatever. Some stuff's inevitable, but the more that we can do preparedness stuff, you know, the more that we can teach you guys, the more that you can absorb, the more that you can be force multipliers to tell people to learn this stuff, the better the community is.
So everybody in this room at some point in their lives taken multiple tests, right? You've through school, everything you've done. Think of how you felt walking into a test you didn't study for. A little bit of panic, and especially when there's nothing on it that you thought you knew, versus the one that you studied, you prepared for weeks for. You're calm. You've got that. You know that information. And that's the same mentality with disaster preparedness. If you're not prepared, that's where panic sets in. People who aren't ready, yeah, you can be scared. Yeah, you can be nervous. That's totally natural. But the more prepared you are, the less panic ensues. And the less panic ensues, the more resilient you are.
I have a lot to say about this, but I won't.
All right. Hey, Jimmy, hold on. Yeah. All right.
I think from our perspective in receiving complaints about, you know, folks dealing with FEMA and disappointment with expectations, I guess, of how disaster recovery works. The very first thing, if you're not hurt, obviously call 911 if you need immediate assistance, but the very first phone call you should make if you are affected by a disaster is to your insurance company. And do that quickly, because if there's a large disaster, you might have quite a wait. I think just from the hail damage to my car, from that March hailstorm last year, it was like 5 months. 5 months before they could even look at my car, and it was totaled. But anyways, insurance is my number one sticking point. And like they said, the same rules, just have a plan, have some emergency supplies, definitely a weather radio in your home, because that will warn you of more than just severe weather. You can also get, you know, hazmat type alerts and other things like that on there. Those are my two big pieces. And also, I have a ton of resources on our website. It's just the county website, sccmo.org, and look for emergency management under government departments. And there's a lot of resources on there that can help you in that preparedness phase and planning phase.
Thank you. I will say it took me years to get my husband to go to the basement, and it drove me insane during a tornado. It drove me insane when he didn't understand why I had extra pairs of tennis shoes down in the basement.
This is the Midwest. You got to get a video of it.
Yeah, I don't go to my basement either. I sit out on the front porch.
Yeah, sit on the front porch. Well, he's finally
TikTok
well-trained.
viral. I can retire next year.
well-trained now. I just want to say a big thank you to Janie, Jeremy, and Scott for being here with us today. Thank you all for coming. Let's give them a round of applause. And we will wrap up. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys. Have a great night.